Hi, I'm Rupert Schofield, President and CEO of the Finca International Microfinance Network and host of the Social Enterprise Podcast. I have the pleasure of talking today with Andy Kleisner, co-CEO of an amazing company out there in Silicon Valley on the left coast that works in solar energy. It is called Amped Innovation. If you haven't heard of it yet, you will. Andy, how are you today?
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, you're very welcome. We're so glad you flew all the way out here just to meet with me. That's astounding, but it does happen all the time, I have to say. In any case, I'd like to ask you a number of questions, starting with, can you describe for our viewers and our listeners what was your journey in social enterprise?
That's a good question. I'd like to know the same about yourself. But to start off, so basically I would say about 10 years ago, I worked in Sri Lanka. And I worked on microgrids. So they were 20 kilowatt microgrids, biomass gasification, which technically is clean tech, though as I describe it, it's probably one of the messier clean technologies because you end up with biotar and different things. But at the time, it was the most affordable energy you could get to a small village. And with 20 kilowatts, you could really power a number of homes. And there would definitely be, the occasion where someone would run an iron or something and the whole grid would go down. But you could actually power a fair number of things. But I realized it wasn't really scaling very well. We had 7 microgrids and people were really putting in their own sweat equity, meaning the villagers, to make this happen and laying the lines to go to the homes, the copper wire and everything, but it wasn't really scaling. And also at the time I saw that these kitted systems were becoming quite popular, these solar home systems. But at the time even just a 3-lamp system cost $500.
Wow.
And people would buy them nonetheless because it was such a luxury to have, and if they had gotten power from the grid, that would have taken, 5 more years, 10 more years to get to them, or never at all, or it was just so expensive by the time they would get a connection, they couldn't afford it. And so I was so, impressed that people would spend this money, go into debt, and, the desire for more power was always there, starting with lights and moving up. People just wanted to have more and more power, but affordability was always the problem. Cut 10 years later.
Well, actually, before we flash to the future, can you give me a little more background? You went to Sri Lanka, which I've never been to, actually. One of probably the only country on earth I haven't been to. But I know about it. I know from people from there. But you went under the auspices of who? Just yourself, or were you with
a company called Lanka Gasifiers?
Oh, okay.
So that was the gasifier company, and I worked as an engineer, expanding those systems, cost reducing them, getting them into more villages.
Okay.
And the first day that I was there, the host family that I stayed with, just because you sounded like you're curious about Sri Lanka, the first thing that my host family gave me to eat was, it looked like some bread or something. It turned out to be a breaded chili pepper. And the thing in Sri Lanka is it's really spicy food. It's similar to Indian food, but a lot spicier and a lot more coconut based, a little bit like southern Indian food, but it has its own varieties of specialties. And it was a breaded chili pepper, and that's when I knew, okay, I'm in it. This is a fantastic country, and it's spicy. So.
Okay, terrific. Well, my introduction to Latin America was from a Texan who persuaded me to eat raw jalapenos, an entire plate of them. Anyway, but that's another story. This is your story. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
No worries.
Okay, take us 10 years ahead then.
Yeah. So jalapenos and peppers, 10 years later, Kurt and I, so Kurt's my co-founder, we've always been getting in touch over the years since I graduated from my master's in robotics at Stanford. He and I met through the Design for Extreme Affordability program there. And we had always stayed in touch over the years. I think Kurt's one of the most brilliant engineers I've ever met. And we would always get together over archery. which we were talking about before this.
Mm-hmm.
And just as a way to sort of catch up about what we're doing in our lives, what cool engineering projects we're working on. And at the time I had just left from Biorad, which is a tech company in the Bay Area, and I had taken a trip to East Africa and just wanted to dive in again in the energy space and understand what is the state of the art today in terms of what do villagers have, what do they want, are their needs being met in energy. And Kurt has a similar background. He also worked on microgrids, so it was very easy to have these conversations about, you know, what products could people want. And we noticed that, you know, it's crazy, but 10 years later, the main thing being sold still is solar lanterns. And while, you know, over 200 million solar lanterns have found their way into people's homes, and that's remarkable, I think back to when I was in Sri Lanka, like, people want to use power for so many more things. If we look around this room, we're running fans, and there's a refrigerator over in the break room, and there's all these things that a lantern just doesn't quite cut it. And so I also remember back to the day when in Sri Lanka the home system was $500, just 3 lamps. And today, you know, at Amped we're selling a 3-lamp system for $80 retail to the end villager.
Wow.
And I feel that, you know, what we're not doing in this industry, you know, all of us who are working on it, we haven't yet cracked the nut on how do we get people up the energy ladder. Everyone likes to talk about it, and it's like a nice thing to talk about, but how do we actually, you know, realize this thing where, you know, people need to be able to create income. They need to be able to run small businesses, and that takes more power, but you need it to be affordable power. And so that's when we started tackling these larger appliances like refrigerator, anything cold chain. We're working on irrigation and the likes of that. And I think that's what's really going to shift these economies that we're working in. And I think today they're also like $1,000 for a solar fridge. But that doesn't need to be where we end up, and it's only going to be through, it's like our vision as a company with Finca, like our whole industry, we need to take that next step. We can't stop at solar lighting. We need to deliver where, you know, lighting was at $500 is now at $80. We need to do the same exact thing, honestly, for DC appliances, and that includes cold chain and all of these productive uses that people, you know, villagers are hungry for any way to make more income. It's just a matter of bridging both the affordability gap and the energy gap simultaneously.
Well, that's fascinating. Let me ask you maybe an impertinent question. Now, you went to Stanford. That's no slouch school. Not as good as Brown, where I went, but, you know, it's close enough. I can't imagine that someone with that education and your obvious intellect, the phone just didn't ring off the hook from aerospace and all these, you know, looking for an engineer, and you fit the profile, and yet you became fascinated and passionate about developing products for really poor people. So why? What's motivating that? Because that's, you got to admit, unless you would tell me, well, everybody at Stanford went on to that.
I think our careers, probably like your own, it's a winding path, and I don't think there's no absolutes in this world, and almost what I find so fascinating is the cross-pollination of those two worlds you're describing. I actually did do a stint working in Silicon Valley. I worked for 4.5 years for Quanta Life, and then Biorad launched 2 high-tech biotech products. But I always knew I wanted to get back. As you know, like why you're doing such impactful work and have dedicated your whole career. You go one time to talk with any entrepreneur, everyone I would say that I've met whenever doing my work, you know, even someone just living their lives in a home is a farmer or whatever, they're all entrepreneurs. And like, it's hard not to want to help them achieve their mission and their goals in life when, you know, you've been exposed to so much more than that. It's hard to get inspired to make one more nice tech gadget when there's this other world calling. And I think what's so fascinating though is I don't think we should ever, you know, just spend our time in one part of that world. I think they both complement each other. So if I spend some time in Silicon Valley working with the best engineers, they all have something to contribute to this other world, where, you know, there's equally innovative engineers. You know, actually one of our investors just sent me an image by WhatsApp of a person riding a motorbike, and they were the most ingenious engineer. They had a problem with their helmet and they used a bottle cap to fix it. And so I think, you know, both of us have things to learn from each of those worlds, and if we can somehow combine them, that's what I think leads to like an innovative solution that works for everyone.
That's a great insight. Thank you for that. And I think, speaking for myself, I think the big secret we may have is that this kind of work is so incredibly satisfying and fulfilling, and ought not to denigrate of these other very necessary professions in the developed world. There's really nothing to compare, in my mind, to somebody who says, you know, thank you, God bless you for what you've done for me and my family. I mean, I remember one of my, well, this is not about me, shut up.
No, start.
No, we can talk about that. I'm sure our viewers are far more interested in your story.
What were you going to say? You can't start it.
All right. Okay, it's a worthwhile digression. So one of our Canadian board members is a tech guy, and he did a great video when we were in Uganda of me arriving at a village bank, and the women were all going crazy, dancing and singing and everything, and he was narrating the video and said, boy, can you imagine walking into having the CEO of a bank walk into your home and into the office and everybody starts dancing and cheering? No, we don't.
It's a little bit of a different context.
It's a bit different, yes, exactly.
I like your world better than the other option.
Yeah, right. Anyway, oh well, I've got myriad questions, but what is your footprint right now? How would you rattle it off? Like, how many countries are you working in, and on what continents?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think part of what's been fun working with the Finca team as our investors is there's a lot of overlapping geographies. So we're working with Bright Life in Uganda, which is a Finca associated company, and that's been really...
I think I've heard of it.
It's very wonderful to work with them, and I think just having that lens of there is this nexus between, you know, energy products, that all of our products are PAYGO enabled, and this world of microfinance. And I think, you know, part of the Finca Ventures team, their hypothesis was, you know, how can we marry these better, or how can we push that forward in a faster, accelerated manner, because it just seems goofy for us each to work in our silos when we could be cross-pollinating and getting more things that people want out sort of faster or at a lower cost. In terms of the other countries besides Uganda where we are, we're in about 20 countries, so we don't, you know, anywhere where there's a distributor, because we're B2B, it's actually, some people have said, oh, you're only a 6-person team, how can you be in 20 countries? But in fact, as a B2B player, we're so lucky to have such an incredible distribution partners, and they do a lot of the heavy lifting. What we found is if we can fill their pipeline with new innovative products, and they do what they're really good at, which is, you know, promoting the product, after sales service, and you know, finding the customer and working with them, I think it's such a beautiful partnership, because we're able to accelerate the rate at which we bring out new products. But in terms of the regions, it's East, West, Central Africa, and then Southeast Asia.
Okay, wonderful. Well, of course, Southeast
Hopefully,
Asia. Sri Lanka also?
No, that would be really
Oddly
cool.
enough,
I know, suspicious, one might say.
Yeah, that's right. Well, of course, I'm very familiar with our own beloved Bright Life, but describe to me, which for my viewers you may not be so familiar, but that's our solar product distribution company in Uganda, and we're partnering with Amped on that. But describe to me what these other distribution companies are they also like Bright Life? They're solar basically
Yeah.
products.
I would say they fall in a couple categories. So there's some groups similar to Bright Life, like maybe they're microfinance. They have a history within the microfinance community.
Uh-huh.
And then there are some that are just ag distributors. So groups that are maybe selling improved seed and fertilizer.
Okay.
And they realize that if they sell a solar product, that can complement their other product line. So we actually have a feature in one of our products that's basically an ability to collateralize an ag loan. And the way you do that is essentially like use the solar power product. Let's say someone purchased paid off all of their loan for the solar product, and then they wanted to take on a improved seed loan. You would basically turn off their TV anytime they didn't pay for the seeds, and that's quite inspiration to pay back your loan.
And this is which country?
We're doing that in Tanzania at the moment.
Tanzania, okay.
And some of our others, so there's that group that falls into the ag category, and then I would say some of them are venture backed, just, their core mission is to sell solar products, and they typically are very professional and they ramp up new countries very, very quickly. And then we also, I think that sort of covers the gamut. I think the one that we want to be able to work with moving forward is some of these smaller traders. So whenever I've gone to Uganda, I love walking store to store, and there's usually a very brilliant local entrepreneur that runs a solar shop. But most of the solar pay-go companies don't operate through those folks. Usually those people are getting solar products on, a bi-weekly or monthly cadence from folks coming directly from Asia with new products. So it's a good way for me to hear about new DC appliances. Like one time I was sitting in a trading shop and someone said, "Hey, there's a new DC razor coming out in January. Did you hear about it?" And I was like, "Oh, this is great. This is the revolution afoot. Better DC appliances, efficient. They're going to use less solar, therefore lower cost." Now, quality is usually an issue, but that's why we're tackling that. But I'd love to be able to get into these solar shops that are everywhere. It's not something that typically these large venture-backed solar manufacturers have been able to do. But I think through a partnership like with Finca, I think we get exposure to a lot of maybe alternative ways to approach the market, and I don't think we have to do things in the traditional way. I kind of think of ourselves a little bit more like a skunkworks team that's very nimble because our products are so affordable. There's no reason we couldn't sell it through those shops even on a cash basis. If not, pilot a new model for pay-go through these shops.
Brilliant. So you introduced travel. How many of your countries have you actually been to?
Oh man. I guess most of them, but they're growing rapidly. So I haven't been to Myanmar, and I would love to. That was a new one for us, and I guess most of East Africa I've been to, but part of, I think, the new solar wave has been in West Africa and Central Africa, so I've been honored to have a lot more exposure than I otherwise would have to West Africa. I just came back from Cameroon, and I have to say I kind of fell in love with it. Everyone on the team there with you, Paolo, one of our distributors, said, "Hey, how do you like Cameroon?" And I said, "I actually really love it." And they said, "You're just saying that because we asked." But actually I think it's special. It might be because it was so hard to get a visa, and so there's not that many travelers going there.
Is that right? I wonder why. Why are they having civil disruption there or anything?
I don't think so. Not too much. But the people were lovely, and it was actually like great weather, and our team on the ground there was just so fun to work with. But
Great.
I guess part of your experience of a country is the people you meet.
I would say almost 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your favorite country that you've been
Oh
to?
my goodness, I can't play favorites because I've got 20 subsidiaries I've worked with, and if I say I prefer this one, everyone else will get angry with me.
Okay.
So.
What's one where you had a special moment with, like, going back on the theme of like the people being so special.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah, I might get back to this star client we had in Uganda. Sadly, she's passed away. In fact, she was the inspiration for this whole initiative of ours, Finca Plus, Finca Ventures, where, for those of you who don't know, Finca Ventures is our investment company, and we invest in great companies like Amped. But I had admired her always. She had an incredible trajectory where she went from absolute poverty, where at her low point she was living alone, a divorced, twice divorced woman with 7 daughters she was trying to sustain. She was making a living cleaning people's houses. She was washing her family's clothes in dirty dishwater. She was taking scraps from the families that she was working for, and they would give her their table scraps to feed her family. She discovered Finca, and she was so poor that the other women in the village bank said, no, she's too poor. She can't join our bank because she'll default on her loan, and then we'll have to pay for it. That was our system. And she got on her knees and begged them to take her on. And 3 of the women took pity on her and said, if she doesn't pay, we'll pay for her. So she got through that hurdle, and she just was incredibly successful. She went from a small market woman trading tomatoes to buying a restaurant, to building a home, and so forth. And she was climbing. She educated her daughters all in university, except those who worked in a restaurant. And then tragically her mother got sick, and then she got sick, and she fell off the ladder out of poverty. And one of the trips I went back there because I always asked about her, how she was doing. And my staff told me, oh, it's terrible, Rupert, she's lost everything, and she's back to where she was practically. And so I hired her to work for us at Finca to be a promoter. But I was so struck and saddened by that example, I decided, you know what, we have to do more than credit. We have to do energy. I'm talking, this is your interview.
That was really interesting.
No, but anyway, actually, in any case, she sadly has passed away at this point, but she was happy when she went because she was working for us and doing a terrific job and so forth.
You close the loop.
Yeah, but she was an incredible inspiration for me personally. But I wanted to ask you, since you work in energy, let's talk about the person you met on one of your trips, who was a customer of your products, who you feel was the most remarkable or memorable example of someone who, hey, this person's actually benefiting from our work. That's really neat.
I think I'm reminded, so in the early days we were working a bit with 1 Acre Fund, and I think there was a farmer named Jennifer, and at the time a couple people had told me people won't really grasp onto this idea of expandable power over time. That, people will be excited to have, lamps, and, that they'll just be grateful for that. And I thought, oh, but all the people I've ever met with always have the aspiration for having everything that you see on TV or you just get through the media. People want the luxurious Western lifestyle. It's you can't really get away from it, and there's nothing we can say, like, yes, it's quite nice to have a TV, to have a refrigerator, all these things. And so when I remember visiting her and just seeing that she had already actually gotten a lamp system. It wasn't our lamp system. This was before Amped really got going. And I remember showing her sort of pictures or diagrams and early prototypes of our product. And she immediately latched onto it. She actually went to the other room and she pointed out she had gotten a TV, an AC TV, an inefficient TV, from a family member. And she asked me if her existing lighting system could run the TV that she got as a gift from a friend. And I said, I don't think it can, because most of these systems are pretty limited. They can maybe only run 20 watts of power. So it's very unlikely that you can run this TV, which is sad because now your TV, you got this as a gift and you can't even run it. It's just sitting here in the corner. But I told her that her vision for what she wanted in her home was very feasible. And it actually sort of inspired a riff on a product that we have, which is something we call a smart cable, which essentially lets you, what I call it is like a battery booster. So we obviously want to provide a product that has a really long battery life. So most of our products just have a lithium iron phosphate battery inside. And that lasts for 5 years, and it's very good for the environment and everything. But I often would see homes where people have a lead acid, like a car battery, just sitting, and they use it as a backup occasionally, but it's usually used enough they can't use it on their motorbike or in a car anymore. But it still has valuable energy capacity. So what we said is there's no reason why we couldn't use that as an auxiliary port if they wanted to run something like a larger, less efficient appliance, but that's something they already have at home. And I think of this more like the glue of the existing energy infrastructure, that we all as humans have some energy and some resources. It's just most companies I've seen out there don't do a good job of weaving these all together and utilizing people's existing assets. But I've always noticed visiting people's homes that they so much love the things they've already invested in. So even if that battery doesn't look like much, it means a lot to that person. And if you can, so what we did is if you just plug on the smart cable to our base controller, it has clips on it. And those clips can be put onto a car battery, and that automatically, extends the runtime of your system. If you want to host an event and run your TV for a longer time period, or you want to run a grinder, you can do that through the smart cable, which I've never seen any other product be able to run like a motorized heavy load like that. And so in talking, what I guess your question originally was, which customer did you benefited from your product? I would say it the other way around. How did we benefit from hearing her story? The product didn't exist yet, but she created the product in the moment when she showed me what she wanted to do with power.
That was going to be my follow-up question, but you anyway. You answered two at once. Very good.
No, it happens all the time, though, I have to say.
Yeah.
Customers, as I'm sure you've seen with different loan packages or things, or your story, how you realized you weren't doing quite enough and you wanted to create different things.
That's a good point. Wow, that's good. You should do my job someday.
No, I just mean to say that I think with energy it's similar, because there's so many ways in which people would like to use their power, but it's not the way most products have been designed. And so I'll tip off my hat to some others in our industry, but there's a company that made a product that's a radio and a lamp combined. And it sounds very trivial, but even doing simple combinations like that, that product has really taken off. And I think if you're observant of the user and what they really want to achieve and hit a price point that's compelling, people say the energy space is saturated with players, and I say the exact opposite. There's infinite opportunities for those who look. That's how the smart cable came about. That's how the expandability came about. That's where, we're inventing a new ice maker from the ground up for these markets that nobody on the market has, and it's only for lack of imagination, I think.
Yeah, well, that's really exciting, and we are very excited about the possibility of these productive use assets. And I always tell anyone who cares to listen that, if you go back to our origins, we came up with this breakthrough about just put a little loan in people's hands and you can unlock all this enormous productivity. Now, what I tell them now is that Well, the microfinance revolution is still, it's providing necessary but not sufficient factors of production. Like the credit, you still need that capital to do pretty much anything. Sometimes it's your own capital, other times you have to borrow it. But that's not enough anymore because there's so much competition in that kind of borderline subsistence existence that most people in developing countries live in. They need something new and novel and more powerful. And I look at the landscape of social enterprises, and AMPT is probably the best example I could ever think of. You guys are creating what could be a second revolution benefiting this segment of people that would be even more powerful because the new social enterprises are in all kinds of space. And today, we saw the synergy even between you guys, between Carl of Good Nature Agro, a wonderful investee we have in Zambia working with small farmers. But you guys were already cutting a deal to work together. And so if we've got Finca, you guys, you know, and the other investees in healthcare and agriculture and you know, education and so forth, this could be a tremendously powerful thing, don't you think?
Well, I agree with. I think it goes to a point like, you know, I think there used to be these large NGOs that tried to do everything, and today I do think I agree with you. There's a bit of disaggregation, which we see in the energy space. Like for Pago Solar, people used to try to do the software, the hardware, and the sales, and now we're partnering with groups like BrightLife, and BrightLife, what I would categorize them as is like manufacturer agnostic distributor, because if you try to tackle that and financing, like if BrightLife tried to be a bank, that doesn't make sense either.
Exactly.
Like the bank has so much experience with this, but if we can somehow each bring something to the table, like Carl's farmer network and his deep experience of agriculture, I can never replicate. But if he sees like, oh, if I could just have a solar pump for, you know, increasing the productivity, we could do that together. And he's not ever going to tackle the hardware side, or maybe he will, but you never know. I would recommend that he come work with us first. But I do think it's these synergies, and I think that's the direction that development is heading, is like, you know, people, the core competencies are really shining, and that's how we're able to move together faster, is through these interesting partnerships and people getting over the need to do it all themselves.
Exactly. And I was one of the chief offenders of wanting to do everything ourselves in Finca. And, you know, we looked at the holistic model, but maybe it's because I am getting up there in years and don't have the same level of energy to conquer the world single-handed. I mean, I probably still could. I just choose not to.
Yes.
But it's so much more fun and easier to collaborate with other people, and you know, the whole turns out to be so much greater than what we could do individually.
Yeah. I would say just working with so many distributors, I think people have such brilliant product ideas. Like, they don't necessarily have to be engineers, but they just come to the table with so many insights about exactly how they want things to be, that, you know, it's so fun. And oftentimes when we work with a distributor, they say, other manufacturers aren't coming to us to share a product roadmap. But you come to us and like want to have this conversation together, and that means a lot. And I think it's that co-creation time that's so critical to us. Like sometimes we do an exercise with our sales teams, not our direct sales teams, but our partner sales teams. And we give them like a couple tokens that they could use. So we say, these are the 10 new products AMPT could come out with. But if you only get to choose 2, which will they be? And some surveys like that. But it's so funny because, and I'd be curious like how you've seen some of these gender lines as well. Because like in energy, when we do that, usually the sales teams, the product desires bifurcate on gender lines. So men often want the boombox type systems, and the women want like the refrigerator. And I don't know if you've seen similar bifurcations in the loan space or in the microfinance space.
Yeah, well, it's in the old days we used to work only with women. And the reason for that was that we were concerned that when the man got a loan, the first thing he did often was go out and find another girlfriend or go booze it up at the local cantina, and that there the money was gone. But the woman, the hypothesis was she was always going to make sure that the children benefited from that. You know, and she'd do the same with any net income she generated from her business. She invested it in the family because her thinking was, well, I'm poor, my parents were poor, my kids are not going to be poor. And Finca's given me the ability to make sure that doesn't happen. But let's take a brief fork in the road here. Tell me a bit about your financial journey, and I would like to hear two things. One, where you are now and what are the next steps. But I would also like to know, since I heard you say this earlier today, what's it like for a woman entrepreneur in your space at this time raising money? Easier, difficult, irrelevant? It's because we hear, at least a lot these days, that women entrepreneurs raise just maybe 10% of the money that comes out of these big unicorn stories and stuff in Silicon Valley. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think a little bit of history on our funding story.
Yeah,
I think
please.
they're always fun and unique. It was fun to hear Carl Jensen's story a little bit earlier today, but I think the first money into AMP was actually from Autodesk Foundation, and they gave a $75K grant, and then fairly quickly thereafter we ended up getting into a hardware accelerator called Make in LA, and it was in LA, and we're based nominally in the Bay Area.
Oh yeah.
And it turns out Kurt has an RV, and so we ended up not wanting to spend any cent of the $75,000 on housing. I mean, come on. So we ended up taking his RV down there, and we took turns staying, outside of the building in the RV so that we could participate in the sessions. And they let us connect to the water line of the building. And then we used the $75K actually for tooling, because we already knew, we already had the design finished for the base WoW solar controller, and we used all the funding to go into the tooling for that. So I think from there we ended up, after this incubator program, we ended up getting our first seed capital, and that's when Finca Ventures joined the round, along with Schneider Electric and actually our factory in Asia. And that partnership has been really, really incredible. Each of those players I just mentioned brings so much to the table, and they're all strategic in very unique ways. And so I feel very, very lucky. In terms of being a woman raising capital, I think as a woman engineer, I think the world has come a long way, and I've never felt a bias in my engineering role in the Bay Area, which is fantastic. I have many friends who have experienced bias towards women, but I actually think I've been really lucky. I had the chance to manage a firmware team at Biorad, and my mentors in that company always sort of promoted, people who are working hard regardless of gender. And I think in fundraising, in the social sector space, I was surprised by some biases. Like at the SandCalc conference, I noticed there were some biases of some investors against local tech entrepreneurs. And I thought, really? In this day and age, in the social sector, there should not be these biases. Technology can come from anywhere in the world. And in terms of, I have experienced some things in terms of being a woman raising funding, but I think that we just have to move forward, and whenever that's happened, I always follow up with the funder and just let them know, you haven't really offended me because I'm pretty thick-skinned, but going forward, in case you want to know this, you should have sensitivities. This might offend others, is what I typically say. And that's how I pay it forward.
Okay. Well, folks, if you are a VC and you don't invest in Andy's company, your loss. That's all I've got to say about that. So, But now you're on the threshold of Series A, is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we're just crossing the threshold in the middle of final closing documents, and it's an exciting time because it's that time where we're going to be able to put the resources behind those efforts that we've been wanting to for the past.
Well, I'm
Couple of
sure you're going to be a spectacular success, and I've loved talking to you. Has there been anything left unsaid that you want to say to our audience out there?
I think, given how you were saying a lot of the listeners are entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs, I think just like really, digging in, just do it. Don't wait to dive in. I mean, the amount you're going to learn. When Kurt and I first started, we actually just, both of us have worked in this sector, but we realized quickly we just needed to get our hands dirty and actually do something, so we ended up consulting. So whatever way it is for you to like really understand the needs in whatever space you're excited about, like just dive in, and you might not start a company right away. Like we didn't really have a real company doing our own products. We were working on other people's products. But that's how we learned what the state of the art is, what we wanted to do, and it's not going to be perfect at first, but just keep iterating, and you'll end up with something. I mean, even today, closing the Series A, it's like we have so many new products coming on board and so much we have yet to iterate on. So.
You heard it, folks. Andy Kleisner, co-CEO of Amped Innovation, a company which will soon be listed on the New York Stock Exchange. That's my prediction. It's been a real pleasure talking to you today.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
So that's it for us. If you want to get a hold of us, how do we get a hold of you, Andy?
So you're welcome to go to our website. It's ampedinnovation.com, or you can email me at info@ampedinnovation.com.
So that's it for this edition of the Social Enterprise Podcast. Hope you enjoyed it all as much as I did. You can reach me at Rupert Schofield on Twitter, or also on Twitter @Finca.